Morning. This is actually Robin and I didn't coordinate this presentation, but the end of her presentation fed in perfectly into my presentation, because what I'm going to be speaking to you today is, of course, the weather. But I'm going to be speaking to you about the weather within a framework that I like to use, which is the title Rethinking Weather, and thinking differently about the weather and how we use it, how we consume it, and how we as people that are in the analytical and the sort of the big data community can actually leverage data to use it as a tool to help both our customers and ultimately to help society. So I'm going to start today by giving you a sort of a brief overview of the weather company, and then we'll actually talk about the opportunities that are being presented to all of us today as it relates to understanding and being able to better action weather and weather-related data. So the weather company is actually the parent company of the Weather Channel. Of course, I would imagine that 95% plus of you are familiar with the Weather Channel and weather.com. So that is a big part of the weather company, but many of you don't know that within the weather company's umbrella or portfolio of companies is several other companies that provide business-to-business services. So within our WSI subsidiary, we provide, for example, all of the weather forecast data to the pilots in United Airlines and American Airlines. So if you flew in today on American or United or many of the other carriers, literally the data that they're getting is coming from us. If you watch the weather on a local television station that wasn't the Weather Channel, chances are very likely that the data that you're getting from that TV weathercaster comes from us. It's basically been white labeled, and then we're presenting it out that way. We do long-range forecasting for large energy companies. We've got a lot of white label forecasts that we do for other countries, and basically work as the National Weather Service for other countries, sort of behind the scenes. So we've got a very, very broad footprint. We sit on a ton of data, and we're really looking to innovate and to help people think more about the weather and think more about how you can integrate weather information into your daily lives and into your business. And that's what I mean by the term rethinking weather. Robin discussed climate change at the end of her presentation, and I'm going to start by talking about climate change and reiterate what she just said in terms of the challenges that are associated with it and what we now know as it relates to climate change. So as she mentioned, the IPCC just came out a couple of weeks ago, and they basically said that there's a 95% probability that it is man-made carbon that is contributing to the warming of the atmosphere. So 95%. That means there's a 5% chance that we're not. There's a 95% chance that we are. Now, from a risk management perspective, and I'm somebody that's spent my entire career working with decision makers both in the private sector and in the public sector, helping to interpret weather data. When you have a 90% probability of something, you act on that 95% probability, because why would you take a chance against a 5% likelihood of something not happen? So the bottom line is, yes, the climate is changing. We need to prepare for it. And as a result of climate change, the weather is changing. Stephen Colbert once said that the weather is nothing more than a million little climates. And the reality is climate is just simply a changing or a moving average. And so we're seeing every day across the world dramatic extremes in the weather. We're seeing huge changes and huge volatility changes. Of course, it's getting warmer, but as it gets warmer, that means that the air can actually hold more moisture in the atmosphere, and that's contributed to increased volatility. And we're seeing that manifesting itself in terms of flooding, like the flooding we just had in Colorado, extreme drought and extreme dryness, which we're seeing in the Pacific or in the southwestern United States, and then implications, because this is global warming, is occurring around the globe. So all of these things are happening, and all of these things are impacting us on a daily basis. Why? Because the weather affects all of us every single day. We don't necessarily think about it, but 70% of you in this room, when you wake up in the morning, you either check your cell phone or you go on the internet or you watch the television, and you get a weather forecast. Why do you get a weather forecast? It's not academic, even though we all love Al Roker, and we all love watching the Weather Channel, I hope. But the reality is we're getting the weather forecast because we're trying to make a plan for the day. And we're checking it in the morning, we're checking it in the afternoon, we're checking it in the evening, we're checking it on the Friday to look for our weekend. It impacts what we're going to wear for the day. So I'm here in Chicago today wearing a top coat for the first time. Maybe if I had been living here in Chicago for a while, or if this was January, I wouldn't be wearing a top coat because I'd be used to it. But all of a sudden, it's cold, and that was like shivering last night, and it was not that cold. It was like 40 degrees. So it has a significant influence on that. Because it has an influence on our sentiment, on what we want to, or what we're going to eat, what we're going to do, it also impacts what we buy. So it ultimately is an economic effect. The effect of the weather has an impact on consumer spending, which translates into variations in volatility in our economy. So it is a significant economic issue. And it's one that is, hang on just a sec, that is foundational to human behavior. So years ago, I took Psych 101, and the only thing I learned from Psych 101 was Maslow's hierarchy of need. And I've been carrying this with me for probably 20 years. As I've been working with large companies like Walmart and Sears and et cetera, because the reality is that before we are compelled to behave in a certain way, those sort of lower level needs have to be met. And from a weather perspective, those lower level needs are really framed out by comfort and by safety. And by safety, I mean not just severe weather, but just, is it going to rain today? Okay, it's going to rain today, therefore I'm going to leave 15 minutes early. From a comfort perspective, that impacts the sentiment, as I mentioned before. What am I going to buy today? What do I need? How am I going to dress the kids? Oh my gosh, it's October and all of a sudden it's cold. I need to go buy a new set of fall clothing. Or it's September and it's not cold yet, therefore I'm not going to buy fall clothing yet. And the reason I'm not going to buy fall clothing yet is the government's shut down. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a job. And I know I don't need that product because it's just not cold enough. So I will wait and I'll delay my purchase for fall until it really feels like it, which is what happened this past September where we actually saw a downturn in consumer spending. That was related to both the uncertainty that Congress gave us, but also the fact that it was not seasonally cold and was certainly less seasonally cold than it was the prior year. So weather is a foundational piece to everything that we're doing. And the thing that certainly from my company, the way that we see the opportunity from a weather perspective is all weather is local. The way a consumer in Atlanta reacts to a prediction in March of 2 inches of snow is completely different from the way a consumer in Buffalo reacts on the exact same day to the exact same forecast. In Atlanta, it's Armageddon. In Buffalo, it's a golf day. And those insights are all measurable. And as we're continuing to be able to collect and process more and more data, both through social media streams, through sales data, actually looking at sales data, and through surveys, et cetera, we can become very, very precise in our understanding of the subtle differences and the subtle changes that the weather creates as it relates to consumer demand and what consumers will be needing both today and also into the future. And the one thing that we know at Weather, of course, is that because we have such tremendous reach and so many people actually come to us to get the weather forecast, we know that it's not just the weather that actually changes behavior. It's actually the weather is actually be impacted by what we're saying is going to happen. So I'm going to show you a short video, and I'm going to hit the right button. I hope I'm going to hit the right button. So let's see. There we go.
Everybody can use a vacation, but sharing it with the Weather Channel's Jim Cantori can be a little unnerving. Look, we get it. Usually when Jim shows up, bad weather isn't far behind. But can't the guy get a break when he's on a break?
Every vacation.
Catch the Weather Channel's Jim Cantori all summer long. Just hopefully not on your beach.
Poor Jim, he can't go anywhere. I just saw Jim 2 weeks ago in New York, and people are like, the seas were parting, and people running and heading for the subway to get out of town. But the reality is that happens every day. Every single day, in much, much more subtle ways, when people are checking their weather forecast, or they're stepping outside and saying it's cold, they're basically going through that mental process of saying, okay, the Weather Channel says it's going to rain tomorrow. I was going to go to the park. Instead, I think I'm going to go to the movie theater, and I'm going to need to buy a coat, so I'm ready. Okay, my coats are old. I need to go to Macy's and buy a new coat. So that level of action is triggered every single day across the country. From a weather company perspective, because of the reach that we have, we know that we have a big influence on that. So that's where we're now taking a very, very serious look at the underlying data that we've collected, as well as looking at external data, so we can become increasingly more specific in terms of the kind of advertising that we show, and also the kind of content that we're putting up. The thing that I also want to sort of hammer home is the fact that the weather forecasts are really, really predictable. Now, I've been a weather person for, I hate to say it now, but probably 30 years. And if I had a nickel for every time somebody teased me about getting paid for being wrong, I'd be wealthy. But the reality is there's very few predictive elements out there that are as skillful as weather forecasts. And they're getting better. To give you an example, so the hurricane track forecasts that we do today are as good at 3 days as they were at 1 day in 1990. Weather forecasts are continuing to be improved. We take it for granted now that when we check the weather, that the weather forecast is going to be right. That's part of the reason why there's a stampede when Jim Cantori shows up at the beach. You never want to see him show up at your vacation point. But the reality is that people trust weather forecasts. They're really good, and they're getting, exponentially is probably not the right word, but they're getting progressively better. And we're going to be launching new satellites within the next couple of years, which are going to give us more and finer level of detail of data. We're going to be able to look down at a half a kilometer resolution by 30 minutes, and we're going to be able to increase that to every 30 seconds when we've got severe weather. So we're going to be able to see data that we couldn't see before, which is going to give us all sorts of new information and new ways to sort of fold that weather into the models that we're getting. So weather forecasts are going to be getting progressively better and progressively more local. To give you a bit of a preview, we are going to be launching within the weather companies, it'll actually be going through our Weather Underground subsidiary, a new kind of forecast that actually computes a forecast on the fly based on where you are. So now when you get a forecast, the forecast that you get is going to be based on the nearest weather station or the nearest weather reporting station. What we're doing is we're moving forward to be able to basically create a forecast that is based on exactly where you are. It's going to pull in all those different elements based on the data that we're collecting, and it's going to create a forecast for you, for your location at that time. So we're rolling it out quietly. It'll go out on Weather Underground here within the next month or two, and then we'll test it, and then it will go out through the big web probably in next year. But it's really a significant step forward as it relates to computing and producing weather forecasts. So the old paradigm regarding weather. Now, some of this information, I've been using this particular, not this slide, but this way to frame the new paradigm that we're coming into regarding weather for probably 20 years. I've borrowed this from the Air Force, because when I was an Air Force weather guy, we used to say this all the time, and we're continuing, and I've continued this mission since I retired in 1997. I retired very young, by the way, so I do this for fun. But the old paradigm as it relates to weather, and if any of you have followed the retail sector, you've heard this a lot of times. As it relates to the old expression, the weather excuse. So the old paradigm is cope and avoid. It's make your plans, understand that there may be a weather component that will impact negatively your plans, but also understand that there's nothing that you can do about the weather, so don't even worry about it. Make your plan, hope for the best. If the weather has a negative impact on your business, whether you're in retail sales or whether you're in insurance or any other sort of weather-related sector, you basically do your best to cope with the losses and also avoid blame if you can. Although it's harder and harder now to do with Wall Street. So that's the old paradigm regarding weather. You can't do anything about it, so don't even worry about it. Just make your plan and then hope for the best. The new paradigm that we're going into now is one that I call anticipate and exploit. Now, I use the word exploit only in the most positive ways. And the reason, by the way, I'm showing this picture of Eisenhower at before the 101st Airborne Division was about to launch into Normandy as part of the D-Day invasions is twofold. Number one, I was with the 101st Airborne Division during Desert Storm, so my heart is sort of with the 101st. But also because the timing of the D-Day invasion was based on a weather forecast. In fact, the forecast was so tight that the Germans actually did not expect an invasion on that day because the weather was going to be too bad. And it was close. It was really close. In fact, the day that they actually launched the invasion, they had to turn back because the weather was still dodgy. But the weather people that were advising Eisenhower sort of kept to their forecast and said, okay, you will be able to do it the next day, and they did. So it's an example of how Eisenhower, even back at the end or in 1944, and the planners were able to leverage the weather data to be able to conduct an attack that gave them at least a semblance of surprise that helped in terms of the war effort. More near-term example is the Osama bin Laden raid. Those guys went in at night, treetop level, into Pakistan, and I guarantee you that the timing and the data that was fed into the planning and the execution of that mission was based on somebody making a weather forecast somewhere. So this whole concept of anticipate and exploit has been used by military planners forever, and the opportunity that we have now, the whole concept of rethinking weather is the fact that the climate is changing. There's more people in the way of this incredibly volatile weather. It's not going to be getting any better. The changes that Robin mentioned in her last presentation that the IPCC put out most of those are sort of baked in the cake. So there's not a lot that we can do. There's not a lot we can do politically, certainly in the near term, but even physically, it'll take a long time to turn all of that back. So the kind of weather conditions that we're seeing and the impacts that we're having are going to be with us for a long time. So that seems like a very sort of daunting and negative message, but from a business perspective, from the perspective of somebody that's in the business of leveraging data and creating tools from data, it actually provides an opportunity. It provides an opportunity for all of us to create tools that will enable consumers to be more resilient. It enables companies to be more effective in terms of the way that they connect with their consumers. And it becomes a way for us to contribute to the adaptations that are going to be needed to be able to deal with this changing climate. And I'm going to give you a brief example. We were working, or still are working, but this past summer we were working with Pantene, and they have a product that helps you. I don't personally use it, just because I don't have that much hair. But if you've got, if you've got certain weather conditions, make your hair kind of like do this, and stand up, and be frizzy and things like that. And we worked with Pantene, and we actually modeled some of their data so that we can determine on a local level what kind of weather in a local market triggers purchases and need of this Pantene product. And we use that then to trigger advertising and trigger ad messages so that when those conditions were occurring, we were enabling Procter & Gamble to be sharing with their customers the fact that they've got a product that can help them deal with the fact that it's going to be a bad hair day. And so the title of it was Forecast Frizz, and this is exactly what it looked like. And this screen grab, that I actually did the screen grab right before we were about to be interviewed by a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and she was writing a story for the Wall Street Personal Journal on what we're doing in general. And it happened to be a day in New York where the low temperature was 85 degrees. It was one of those New York days where it was just incredibly hot and muggy and sticky. So I just grabbed this thing and I gave it to her, and it gave her the start point for writing her story. And so she wrote an amazing story, and it was published on August 15th of this past year. And you can see the top of the banner there, the forecast calls for shopping, and it was sort of the front page of the personal journal. But what I thought was most interesting and was most powerful was a couple of things. Number one, of course, she talked to Procter & Gamble. They said, yes, this has been very successful for us in terms of being able to communicate with our customers at a time when they're going to need our product and then give them an incentive to actually buy it. But what was really cool was that this reporter actually went on Twitter and found somebody that had tweeted the fact that they had saw this ad, and she interviewed this young lady. It's like a 21-year-old girl. And what she said was, I sort of paraphrased it, was, wow, they really know what I need. That's amazing. And the other thing that was good was that she wasn't freaked out that we knew exactly what she needed, because we didn't ask her for any, obviously, personal information. When people communicate and when they log in, when any of us or most of us go on weather.com to check the weather, we put our zip code. So we know where the zip code is, and we know where people are. So this is an example of how weather information plus analytics plus the power of the understanding of how forecasts shape consumer demand all sort of triangulate to enable us to serve up a message that then transcends advertising and starts to become something that is useful for consumers. And that, when I say rethinking weather, that's what I mean. Rethinking how we process, understand, and communicate weather information so it makes it more useful for other folks. And one other thing I just want to add, I don't have a slide for this, but 2 weeks ago-ish, we had that tremendous cyclone that hit in India, Cyclone Paileen. The expectation was that there could be thousands and thousands of people killed. In fact, 15 years ago, there was another cyclone of the same size that hit in the same place where 10,000 people were killed. This time around, tragically, there were some people killed, but very, very few. And the reason for that was the Indian government has invested a lot of money in weather satellite technology, forecast modeling technology, weather radar technology, but more importantly, a vast amount of people that were in front of where that cyclone were going to hit have cell phones now, where they didn't have cell phones in the past. So that information could be communicated to a broader reach of people. Those people were mobilized. Those people got out of the way. And we basically did not see a repeat of the tremendous carnage that could possibly have happened. And the same is the same is true for Sandy. Sandy was a tremendous tragedy, but the weather forecast for Sandy that showed that storm coming up this way and taking a left hook and going right into New Jersey was incredibly accurate. Incredibly accurate. So the loss of lives that were saved can't be calculated, but we do know that the combination of the increased accuracy of the forecasts, the increasing ability for us to communicate to people at a very local level and a very rapid level combines to create a tool that is dramatically increasing our ability to be resilient, to be able to deal with our changing climate, and to be able to rethink how we are going to adapt to deal with the climate. And this thing is saying, please wrap up. So I think I'm just about done with my 15 minutes. But thank you all very much. It was great talking to you, and I'll leave it to the next speaker.